To adjudicate the conflict, these documents appeal to Jesus' tradition itself, especially the material that's in the Upper Room Discourse in John 13 through 17. That might imply that the opponents are misinterpreting or misrepresenting the fourth gospel, John's gospel, and that he's doing damage control with these letters. We've seen this kind of need for reminding, encouragement, and correction all through the New Testament, especially things like 2 Thessalonians following 1 Thessalonians or 2 Corinthians following 1 Corinthians. There are times when things get forgotten or misunderstood or misrepresented or exploited, and the answer is to go back to basics. These readers, the children of the elder, are going to need to know the gospel again and again, more and more deeply, in order to truly understand it and live it out well. And John's strategy is not to heap new stuff on them, but just to take them back to basics. This reminds me of football coach Vince Lombardi. After a disastrous previous season, in the first day of training camp, Lombardi gathered all the players. He held up a ball and he said, "Gentlemen, this is a football." That's what the elder is doing. Children, this is love. This is also a really nice early window into the process of Christian training and teaching as it's already developing in the first century. This kind of guidance from the elder develops into catechetical schools where leaders are trained, into the voices of church fathers speaking into controversies and correcting their flocks, into holy tradition itself, into full-blown church councils like the Council of Nicaea in 325 to address the teaching of Arius. It develops into the canons and the creeds of those councils which guide Christians for centuries, into scholars and their textbooks, reformers and their confessions of faith, and on and on. The saga of the elder and his churches is obviously not the first instance of this. We already saw this with Paul in Corinth and Galatia, but it's a truly formative moment in the development of that tradition of teaching. We've talked about 3rd and 2nd John. Let's talk about 1st John. Its structure eludes many readers. It seems almost stream of consciousness. This is a detail from the Bible Project video on 1st through 3rd John. It follows one common proposal to read 1st John as two parts. The first part, God is light. The second part, God is love. This actually comes from New Testament scholar Raymond E. Brown. Note at the top of the screen that each half begins with the same phrase. This is the message. So the first big message is God is light, and the second big message is God is love. This has its strengths, but it can't accommodate a lot of the messiness that we see even in each half. I prefer a recent proposal from John Christopher Thomas, who sees a subtle chiastic structure through the whole letter, because I think if you read it through this structure, it reads much more powerfully. Note the pattern here. Again, a chiasm is named after the Greek letter chi. New Testament scholars call it chi. And as you can see, the nested structure of a chiasm looks like the left half of a key. Here's the conventional way of marking out a chiasm. A refers to the first claim, and A prime at the very bottom of the page shows you the last. B, the second element, corresponds with B prime, the next to last element, and so on. I've also color-coded these letters for reasons that you'll see in a minute. To identify a chiasm is not a slam dunk. It's a judgment call. The vocabulary can be subtle and overlapping. What you look for is identifying terms or themes. So eternal life shows up in A and it shows up in A prime. I've highlighted terms within the stages that John Christopher Thomas identifies as A, B, C, and so on, with the same color as the letters in my outline. If you look at 1 John 1:2, there it is, eternal life, at the beginning of this correspondence. And then as we look at the end of 1 John in chapter 5, we see eternal life popping up again multiple times, along with just life. And death, of course, is counterposed with life, eternal life. Then there are all these terms I've highlighted in blue, which congeal in section B, which is the rest of chapter 1 into the beginning of chapter 2. And the terms you see repeated in B as well as B prime are lying and deceiving. A message. B primes is not exactly the same. Instead of message, the focus is witness. B and B prime both focus on the blood, and they both focus on fellowship. B uses the word fellowship, B prime uses having the Son and having the Father. And both use a distinctive phrase which tips off the reader, making him a liar. That's at the bottom of the screen in 1:10. If we say we haven't sinned, we make God out to be a liar, and his word is not in us. In section B prime, you can see the same kinds of terms or their near equivalents. And in verse 10, the key phrase, whoever doesn't believe God has made God a liar, because he hasn't believed in the testimony, the witness, that God is born concerning his Son. And so on down through these layers, the new commandment that Jesus gave, the antichrists that oppose it, the confidence that we can have. And finally, the heart, section F in the middle of chapter 3, which is the point John has been driving at all along. Love one another. And there it is, the very middle of the letter and the heart of the chiasm, if it is a chiasm. This is the message that you've heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We shouldn't be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. Why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. That's in orange because it shows up in section E. Don't be surprised, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. The world is in green because it's in section D. You know that we've passed out of death into life because we love the brethren. Whoever doesn't love abides in death. Everyone who hates his or her sibling is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has, there it is, eternal life, abiding. I think it's significant if eternal life is a marker at the beginning and the end of this letter that it also shows up right at the heart. Life together as a living sacrifice after Christ's sacrifice for our life is eternal life, and the very opposite of indifference, rivalry, hate, murder, death. All of the material in A through E is driving at F. This is the message. And all the details of A through E are unpacking or fleshing out that command, what it means to love one another instead of hating one another. And then comes the second cry. This is the message, because what John has gotten across in F pays out. That fundamental commandment to remain in him pays out in sections E prime through A prime, in all the details that we see again on the way out that we saw on the way in. Loving one another in the way that Jesus did in that upper room pays out in greater confidence, helps us resist the antichrists, the enemies or the rivals of Jesus that are proliferating, perfects our love because God is love and his love is in us. It honors God's truthfulness rather than making him out to be a liar. And it lands in the last paragraph, the last two verses. We know that the Son of God has come and given us understanding, so that we may know the one who is true, and we are in him who is true, in his Son Jesus Christ. He is the true God, or this is the true God and eternal life. And the last verse strikes some people as an awkward ending, but it's perfect. Little children, keep yourselves from idols. Keep yourself from fakes. Keep yourself from darkness, even if it masquerades as light. And that kind of structure is compatible with this twofold scheme. It's just more detailed and I think more powerful. This is the message in 1:5 signals our way into the chiasm through the ways God is light. And then 3:11's this is the message signals our way out. Let's finish section F since it is the heart of the letter. Verse 16, by this we know love, that he, Jesus, laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. Note the very simple structure of the reasoning, if P then Q, or P implies Q. His laying down his life for us is love, and that implies that we ought to love one another the same way. 17, but if anyone has the world's goods, worldly goods, and sees a brother or sister in need, yet closes his or her heart against that one, how does God's love abide? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, mere word or talk, but in deed and in truth. As I go down through the rest of this letter, note how the reds turn into oranges, that's level B prime, yellow, C prime, green, D prime, blue, E prime, and then purple, F prime as we end the chiasm. And note that of course some of the vocabulary in one section flows over into the next section. Of course they do, they're all driving at that common point and drawing from it on the way out. That also makes identifying a chiasm tricky. Whether or not we see it as a formal chiasm, I hope you can see it as something of a funnel into a main point and then back out of it. Those simple equations throughout, P equals Q, this is the true God and eternal life, and the simple implications, by this we know love that he laid down his life for us, are packed with each other's meaning. It depends on the whole for you to get a sense of what each part plays. It's true that 1 John is not a linear deductive exercise. It's a dense web of meaning where each term picks up something from the others and the whole hangs together like a web. And look, isn't this cute? I found a heart-shaped web. Because that is what 1 through 3 John are, a heart-shaped web of claims, all drawing their strength and power from one another. And the chiasm are like the radial threads coming in and out of the center of the web. The elder is driving at the central summary in the middle of that chiasm. There is life, which is Christ, and there is death, which is antichrist, any alternative to Christ. And that reminds me of practically the entire Bible from Genesis 2 onwards. It comes down to hitting or missing. Hitting and missing are not equal opposites. There's the goal, there's Christ, versus missing the goal, which can happen in any direction, above, below, to the left, to the right. And that's been true all along as well. Wisdom looks like one thing, but folly can look like practically any alternative to that wisdom. Love looks like Christ's love, but alternatives to love can look like any number of things. So throughout 1 John, and really all three, the elder combines affirmations on the one hand and anathemas or refutations on the other hand. But the focus, as you've seen, is on the affirmations, on the light, on the truth, on Jesus Christ. So the elder, addressing the remainers, not the ones who have left, but the ones who have stayed, of the character of true Christian faith. Jesus is the Messiah. God is light. God is love. This is a football. And each of those truths becomes the indicative part of an indicative imperative. This is the case, therefore, this is how to act. So, for ethical signs, for imperatives, show that we believers have communion with God. We obey His commandments, not out of sheer obligation or legalism, but out of joy. We reflect God's character and Christ's character. We love one another. And because we have the Father and the Son, we are given His Spirit. As always, those imperatives, how we should act, follow from the indicatives. If P, then Q. P implies Q. And how often have we seen this charge in the New Testament writings, that the rivals aren't living lives of love or faith? We see it in the general letters. We see it in Paul's letters. We see it in the Gospels and Acts. Over and over, the elder tells us that the lives of these opponents, these rivals, lack this integrity. They don't welcome the brothers. They don't love one another. Christian faithfulness and truthfulness and love are the literal moral of the gospel story. They are where the good news makes sense. It's right up front in 1 John 1:5. This is the message we heard from Him, from the Lord Himself, and proclaimed to you. God is light, and in Him there's no darkness at all. Not at all. No intellectual darkness, no spiritual darkness, no moral darkness. So if we say we have fellowship with Him while we walk in darkness, we lie and we don't practice the truth. So integrity that reflects a God in whom is no darkness at all is essential for Christian understanding, not mere information or knowledge or gnosis. Christianity is not compatible with Gnosticism. Mere knowledge and technique are not enough to reflect a God who is life.